Hello, everyone. My name is Rich Fitzgerald, and welcome to the Men of Principle podcast. Today, I am with an incredible guest. His name is Josh McKinney. Josh is a husband, a Jiu-Jitsu black belt, the host of the I Suck at Jiu-Jitsu podcast, and the owner of Head Nod HQ. Josh, welcome, man. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously, I mentioned you're obviously Jiu-Jitsu black belt, right? So, when did you start training Jiu-Jitsu? What was it that got you in the training in the first place?
So I started in 2008. I was 14 years old and I was overweight. My mom actually made me start training. She made me try it. And once I tried it, the first class, I was hooked. I was in.
That's awesome. So because I've listened to your podcast for a long time now. I know your dad also trains with you, right?
Uh-huh.
How's it been training with your dad over the years?
Man, I it shaped my life in a way that is really interesting because it's hard to relate to other people that have different relationships with their dads.
Mhm.
At 13, 14, right when a lot of especially young men start to rebel, I was spending 30 minutes in the car, 20 minutes in the car with my dad every night, spending 2 hours at the gym with him every night, just conversating and hanging out. And he was my friend. And
Mhm.
so, like, kind of having this common goal. And I think even the common suffering that comes with jujitsu,
Yeah.
we had certain guys in the gym that always beat up both he and I. And he and I
Mhm.
were always pretty good in the gym. We were always some of the top guys. But if there was an adversary that could beat us both, I think there was a lot of teamwork and how we were gonna get that guy.
Yeah.
And so, man, it was just it's created a dynamic and a friendship that I recognize that most people never get to have with their father. For instance, I like every morning at 8 o'clock. We've never actually talked about this, but like 8 a.m. every single morning, my dad knows that I'm up and I get a phone call. And so me and my wife will be sipping coffee and I'll always make the joke, oh my gosh, it's my dad. I'm probably in trouble. And I will answer and I'll have a 20-minute conversation with my dad. And keep
Mhm.
in mind, I work in my studio. He works at the gym next door, like literally they're 10 feet apart from each other. And I'm going to see him later that day.
Yeah.
And we still just start our day talking. And it's like, it's not even a thought. It's not even this work. It's just this fun thing we get to do. And so it just makes me go, wow, this has shaped my relationship with my dad in a way that I know none of my friends really get to experience.
Yeah, that's awesome. I can't quite speak. I don't know exactly what you're talking about because obviously I don't train my dad, but I did start training at the same time as my wife. Excuse me, my wife and I started training together. We actually brought our kids to train at the time, and they gave it a free trial. They gave it a week. They didn't want to do it, and we're like, all right, well, we'll do it. This is
Uh
awesome.
huh.
So luckily now our kids did come back to it. Well, my oldest son does Muay Thai, and my middle son does Jiu-Jitsu. And man, there's something really special about having that dynamic of being a Jiu-Jitsu family. It's pretty cool.
And it's just like, if you think about it, when you have a normal family, a normal, whatever, American family,
Mhm.
and you have a 14-year-old daughter, an 18-year-old son, and then you and your wife who do two different jobs, what do you guys have in common?
Mhm.
Usually it's nothing. And so what do you guys talk about? If you have this shared suffering, if you guys have these inside jokes because, oh yeah, freaking Dave at the gym was being, didn't wash his gi again, he stinks again. And you guys have these inside jokes. It's like you have these conversations and this communication that other couples are just they don't get to have. I know this same thing because my wife and I get to train together now, but she didn't always train.
Mhm.
And we always have communicated well, but there is just this new dynamic since she started training that we can, like, I don't know, we can think of things from the same perspective a lot easier now than ever before.
That's awesome. Does she have, like, in your opinion, does she have a little different level of respect for you now that she's training, understands?
No, no, absolutely not. If anything, she respects me less because there's less of a mystique around what I do because it's like, it doesn't matter if I've dedicated 15 years of my life to something
Mhm.
and that I have a podcast about it and I am becoming this trusted, reputable member of the jujitsu community about a specific move or idea or even thing that I invented. My
Mhm.
wife still knows better. You know, she
Yeah.
still knows better. And so when we and I say this half jokingly, but
Yeah.
really I don't. It's that this is like when it comes to coach student, when your student is your significant other, this is
Mhm.
like a really common thing that my friends deal with, and
Mhm.
something that I found really early on that worked so well and allowed us to have fun was, hey, I have a lot of other coaches at the gym, babe. Maybe you should learn from them. And so, like, my wife will occasionally ask me a question. We'll occasionally drill together. We like to train together. She's not training right now. She's pregnant.
Oh,
But we, like, when she's training, like, we'll train together, and that's a lot of fun. But when it comes to like the coach student thing, it
mhm.
doesn't fit our relationship very well. I just tell that, like, it just puts me in a different position than I'm ever in with her at home. You know, at home
Sure.
we make decisions together, but on the mat, I am the absolute authority and I know everything and you know nothing now. And it's a weird dynamic. And
Yeah.
we found that, like, oh wow, it works better if she just goes to the other coaches at the gym and asks them stuff and learns from them. And it's more fun for both of us. And so that is, yeah, that is my wife and I's training together relationship.
That's cool. Do you think like so being that you've trained with your dad since the beginning, do you think that seeing your dad's example while training jiu-jitsu like has potentially helped you either as a husband or potentially like a father one day?
Absolutely. Man, if there is one trait that I have gotten from my dad, and there's a million traits that I have, but one that I really notice, it is whether you put it as work ethic or you put it as stubbornness, it is one of those two things. It's just the ability to keep working at something, even if it seems like you're not going to be successful at it, being able to keep working and keep striving. And that is something for me in my jujitsu that I've always done. And when I look back now, I realize that this is a habit that I've watched my dad exercise as a pastor, as a jujitsu fighter, as a
Mhm.
gym owner, like a personal training gym owner. And I've just seen his like consistency, his hard work, and that's the biggest, I think, positive thing that I have, that I really notice helps my jujitsu from my dad.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome, man. So for those listening who maybe don't know you very well, or maybe they just heard that you're the host of the I Suck at Jiu-Jitsu podcast, Josh doesn't actually suck at jiu-jitsu. He's pretty good, as evident in his one of his recent matches. At the Nashville Open, right? And we won't go
Yeah,
into
I had a feeling when you shared the thumbnail that you shared on Instagram, I had a feeling that this is where we would go.
well, we won't go into the drama because we both have Jesus in our hearts, right? We won't
Of
go into
course.
that. We won't go
Of
into that.
course.
But what was it like beating AJ, a former world champion? Like, what does that do for your confidence on your jiu-jitsu journey?
I don't know. I think I've been explaining it like this, and this just fits to me. I really think that if you are dedicated to something for a long period of time without huge fruitful success, and that's not to say that I didn't have success in my gym and success in other things, but
Sure.
my true dedication to jujitsu has always been as an athlete, has always been as a competitor. And
Mm,
at black belt, at the highest level, I've really never had any significant wins. And it started to kind of happen. I started to beat some really tough guys, and I started to have really good matches with some of the best guys in the world. And it's still, though, there's always this voice in your head that still says when you're doing something like this and you haven't completed what you're trying to complete,
mhm,
that you're crazy. Is like, hey, this isn't true. And whatever that voice is, it knows you really well. And it says, hey, you're from Granite City, Illinois. No one from Granite City, Illinois can do anything. You don't have the team around you. These guys are training at better teams. They have already beaten these other people. You know, and
Mhm.
you get these voices in your head, and you can fight them and beat them down all you want and believe in yourself all you want. But until you actually experience the success, there's always something in your mind like, what if I am just crazy and all
Mhm.
this time is wasted? And getting to, win in, just win that division. That was a stacked division as a whole. And
Yeah.
then getting to, like you said, beat a former world champion in the final. It was that, like, as soon as I won that match, my first thought was, I knew it. I knew it. I knew I wasn't crazy.
Mhm.
I had wavered a little bit. I've done a lot of crazy things, but I knew I wasn't crazy.
Yeah.
And it was just like, one of my students has the video of me getting done. And of course, my opponent's arguing with the ref after I just crushed him the whole time, and trying to say, I don't even know what he's trying to say, trying to speak a different language and
Mhm.
argue with the ref. The ref's ignoring it. I'm ignoring it. But there's a point where I look up at my students and I just mouth something like I knew it or something like that. I just mouthed something yes, I knew that this was going to happen. And it was, yeah, it was really cool to confirm uh, that the dedication is paying off, and
Mhm.
like, okay, I can do this.
So it's really been probably the last year or so in which you've really come into your own at black belt, right? Like, what do you think was the thing, if there was anything that you can pinpoint that really helped you make that change?
I think there were a few things, but I really think the first one was my weight class change. I had been competing, so basically from the end of my blue belt career to the very end of brown belt. That would have stretched across 5, maybe 6 years, maybe even a little more. But I competed at middleweight, which is 181 pounds in the gi.
Mhm.
I moved up at brown belt right at the end. It was literally my last brown belt tournament. I like had an injury and I couldn't make weight, my normal weight class. So I was like, I'll just compete in the weight class above. And I did really well. I won my division. And I go, okay, I might just stay at this weight class. It's way easier for me to make. And I
Mhm.
stayed there like my first 3.5 years at black belt. And I did good. I did bad. I did good. I did bad. But one thing that seemed to stay is I kept getting injured and I couldn't figure out what it was. And really now looking back, I think I was just a little unhealthy. I think that my jujitsu was actually good enough that even kind of out of shape for competing at a professional sport, I was able to hold my own with most guys. But
Mhm.
then, like, I just came to a point, it would have been the end of 2021. I had a rib injury that I had had off and on for like a year.
Mhm.
And I was just so tired of dealing with it. I was so frustrated. And I just go, if I can't fix my body, I just can't compete. And so I just spent the next 6 months like focus on being healthy. I stretched every day to what my capacity was at the time. And eventually it turned into, I felt really good stretching every day and I gained a
Mhm.
ton of flexibility. I made sure I only lift once a week, but I made sure that I lifted that one day, whether I was in town, whether I was out of town. It was really consistent. And then I really paid attention to my diet. And so I moved back down. I was probably walking around a lot of the time at 200 pounds. And now again, I'm competing at 181 in the gi, which is about 177 for me. And not cutting any or much water weight to do that. You weigh in and then pretty much compete. And so it's like a significant 20 pounds of almost all of it being body fat, is a huge difference.
Mhm.
And I really think that that was one of the biggest things. And then I really do think too, I took a lot of losses in like 2020, 2021 while being injured. And I knew that I wasn't competing at 100%, but I also knew I was learning lessons about competing. And
Mhm.
then it was like finally time to start applying all those lessons and really test to see if what I thought was working was actually going to work. And so I really just feel like those things of like, okay, we have a lot of data. Let's test it. Let's get more reps. Let's get more reps. And then not being fat, were the two really, like and what did I start with? My mom made me go to jujitsu to lose weight. It took 15 years, I guess. And I'm finally competing at the right weight class. And I noticed that even though a lot of the athletes that I go against are probably on steroids, I don't notice, I have not fought a single guy at middleweight yet and gone, oh no, this guy's stronger than me. I really believe, and it could just be me trying to be positive. I really have felt stronger than every single person that I've grappled in the last 18 months of doing middle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I understand that completely because I compete. I'm generally a light heavy, sometimes heavy, depending upon where I'm at. So I'm always right around 200 pounds.
Mhm.
And there's sometimes I have matches where I feel really good, and other times I'm like, man, that guy feels different. Like just strength
Mhm.
wise, like that's just questionable. And you don't ever want to be that guy who makes accusations because we know that, for one, it's legal, right? In most
Mhm.
organizations, it's legal. They could do what they want. But
Yeah.
at the other time, on the other side, I should say, like, your party is like, man, do I want to keep dealing with that though? It's frustrating sometimes to know that you're at that little bit of a disadvantage. So you have to make it up with technique, right?
Yeah, as they say, it be like that sometimes, man. And that's like that's the truth. I feel it adult sometimes, like especially at medium heavyweight. There were guys that I fought at medium heavyweight at 195 that were that just way too strong for me. That
Mhm.
just were superhuman strong. But I really do think a lot of times too at 195, their frame was like I'm 5'10 and
Yeah.
my frame is not that it's not that big at
Yeah.
middleweight. Of course, there are the guys at middleweight. I fought a guy first round of worlds this year. He had to be 6'5" or 6'6". He was so tall.
Mhm.
And so sometimes that's still gonna happen. But like at medium heavyweight, it seemed like everybody was over 6 foot.
Mhm.
And I was the only one under by a decent amount. And so it was just, that it just creates different problems that I don't have to usually deal with at middleweight.
I think that's something people don't talk about enough too, right? Like, is the height. Everyone always talks about
Mhm.
how strong you are, but it's rarely do people talk about how tall someone is. And as you know, that's a huge advantage. I mean, so I think what most middleweights are probably in that 5'8" to 5'11" neighborhood, generally speaking,
Mhm.
give or take. And those guys at the medium heavy and above, they're usually 6 foot or taller. It's tough to deal with that length sometimes too.
It really is. I think about a lot when I teach a lot of jujitsu, I talk about distance a lot and where your upper body is compared to your opponent's upper body, especially when you're on top. And they always talk about that like chest over chest distance. If you think about that, and if it is as advantageous as people believe, if your legs are longer, I have more leg to deal with to get chest over chest. And
Hmm.
so, like, just having to do those fights over and over again, the leverage that you can create is just different. I'm sure that there are disadvantages too, sometimes to having more length, but I
Sure.
don't seem to be able to find what those disadvantages are, you know?
Yeah, I hear you. So obviously you own a gym, right? Like you run Head Nod HQ. How do you balance being a competitor and a gym owner at the same time?
So a few things. Some things are like it really is very collaborative at my gym, meaning
Mhm.
like, it's always funny to use that word. I know people like in the jujitsu space, you're like, oh, so it's like some type of hippie thing. And it really isn't. It's just, I really think if you have the same principles, your principles are in line jujitsu wise, like you believe kind of the same ideas, then you can apply whatever techniques to those ideas. And
Mhm.
so, and when I teach in this way, I'm able to kind of like teach a principle and then pull another one of my black belts on and have him teach a few things. And a lot of times I'm learning with everybody. And then I'll have another, and that'll spark a thought in another one of the black belts' minds. And I'll pull him up and have him do something. Or just like, I'll let everybody drill it and I'll notice the same questions coming up. And then I'll go, oh, I need to explain this little fight. And a lot of times that little fight helps me too. So a big part of that coach competitor is that like we're all learning together all the time,
Mhm.
at least understanding wise. But then now it's like some of my toughest training is when I just drive 2 minutes from my house to my gym and go to open mat. Like, it's just I've had a tough gym for a long time, and that creates more and more tough people.
Mhm.
And so as a competitor now, it's like more of me going, okay, when am I going to train here? And then when I'm going to sit out because like it's not hard for me to get that athlete training anymore.
That's awesome. So you also host the I Suck at Jiu-Jitsu podcast, right? What
Mhm.
made you start the podcast, and why did you choose to name it that?
So I had this idea for a YouTube channel for a while, and it was going to either be called the I Suck at Jiu-Jitsu Show or the You Suck at Jiu-Jitsu Show. And what we were going to do is just highlight the negatives of techniques that like people do wrong. And so
Mhm.
like these are the things that you're doing wrong on these, on your guillotine or on your whatever technique. And I liked that idea, but like to really do video well, it was gonna be expensive and it was gonna be hard, and it just like and it wasn't really a big thing that I cared about at the time.
Mhm.
One day I'm at class and one of my, he might have even been a white belt at the time. He's one of my purple belts now, Derek. He says, "Yeah, I was listening to this podcast today." He goes, "You ever listen to podcasts?" And I go, "Oh yeah, I do. I really like, a few," and named a few. And he goes, "You should start a podcast." And I was like, "Huh, I've never really thought of that. Like that's not a bad idea. Maybe I should." And that night I went home and my wife was still at work and like looked up an app to start a podcast and I found a free app and I started the I Suck at Jiu-Jitsu show that night. And there was really not a lot of thought that went into it. I was just like, I knew that I had a lot of jiu-jitsu perspective to share. And it was just like, oh, well, I could do that here and it would be easy. And it seems to be easier than any other avenue sharing these ideas. And then I think I probably even said it in my first couple, like, yeah, I'm not committed to this at all. Like, I'm willing to drop this at any time. I'm committed to 5 episodes or I'm committed to 10 episodes.
Mhm.
And then once I kind of got there, I would get like an interview and get to have a conversation with a high level guy. And I would go, I would never have gotten to have this conversation if it wasn't for this podcast. I
Mhm.
should probably keep doing this. And that was really what kept the podcast going.
That's awesome, man. I mean, I was telling you before, but for those who, those of you who are listening before the podcast, me and Josh were talking. I told him that about a year and a half ago, I started binge listening to all of Josh's stuff. I was looking for a jiu-jitsu podcast, just anything to, increase anything related to jiu-jitsu in my mind on my way to work. And I found the I Suck at Jiu-Jitsu podcast and just thought, hilarious title. It's about jiu-jitsu. Let's see what this is all about. And I've really enjoyed listening to you, Josh. But aside from just a podcast, you came out with a concept called the three lenses.
Mhm.
And can you describe that to everyone and what that's all about?
Yeah. So I guess I'll explain it like this. There are a lot of different training methods that people like to use to get better at jujitsu.
Mhm.
And just recently, I did 2 episodes on my podcast. It was like 196 and 198, and they were me breaking down 8 different training methods. And what's interesting about these training methods is that certain people, like really, really high level people, have really strong opinions towards and really strong opinions against some of these training methods. And it
Mhm.
was always really interesting to me because my coach learned and taught in a specific way, and I learned and taught differently than he did.
Mhm.
And then there were certain guys that I would run into that had amazing jujitsu, and they learned and taught a little bit differently. And I just like, I don't know, I've always kind of say with me, the biggest thing that I do well is I observe. And a lot of times I'm just observing different people doing different things. And one day I'm actually thinking of 3 specific people. I don't think I've ever said this, verbalized this before on the podcast, but I was thinking of 3 specific people. And I was wondering why what they preach is totally different. And so the 3 people were, do you know who Chewy is?
Yep.
from
No,
like
Chewy.
Jiujitsu.
Yep.
Okay. So Chewy was one, and I know Chewy very well, talk to him all the time, have trained with him multiple times, have been to multiple seminars, had him on my podcast, know him very well. I've done like private coaching with him where he's coached me for my podcast, all kinds of stuff. John Thomas was my other thought. Again, I spent 6 months, maybe longer, training like 3 or 4 hours a day with John Thomas when I was a blue belt. He didn't have a place to train. I had a matted garage, and that was how we kind of had that relationship. And then my friend that I had met more recently, Chris Paines. And what was interesting about Chris is he and we always joke, he's from England. We always joke that we're brothers, that we're just born across the world. And we just, when it comes to how we explain jujitsu, what things we thought were important, what things we threw out when it came to teaching, they were very, very similar. And so these three guys, though, all had three completely different messages of training.
Hmm.
Chewy, his training method was about repetition, and what he would do a lot was drilling. And meaning like you do the move a bunch of times and you get a lot of reps doing it. And
Hmm.
this, to me, like another reference, like Andrew Wiltsey, he trains in this method. Andrew Wiltsey is, to me, probably the best guy I've ever grappled, or one of the best guys I've ever grappled. And so I look and I go, okay, that method obviously works. The people that say, oh, that method does not work, they're wrong. That method works.
Hmm.
Then you have John Thomas. His method was about small details, and it was about problem solving and slowing down things and saying, well, this grip works better than this grip, and this position works better than this position. And it was very study based, and it was way less about repetition. And then there was Chris, and Chris's ideas a lot of times had more to do with knowing the big idea and then accomplishing the goal in whatever way you saw fit. And it was like these three totally different things, but I had rolled with all three guys. And the cool thing about jujitsu versus anything else is if a scientist is explaining something that you don't believe, he can always fall back to, well, I'm a scientist and you're not. In jujitsu, if I explain something that you don't believe, you can always say, let's fight. And
Show
so,
me.
right? Yeah, show me, prove it.
Yeah.
And so, like, I constantly, when I'm teaching seminars, I'm making crazy statements and I'm saying, please raise your hand and see if you can prove me wrong. Please let me know, because maybe you can, maybe I'm wrong, but the only way I'll ever know is if somebody proves me wrong. Right.
Mhm.
And so that is, all three guys weren't wrong, but I mean, they're all three completely different. And
Yeah.
that is specifically where the three lenses came from. The athlete lens, I had it clicked with like the guys like Chewy, the guys like Andrew. These guys are repetitive. They do the moves over and over. And what it does is it conditions them to be able to do those moves over and over, no matter what the condition is, no matter how tired they are. It like increases their conditioning. And to me, it really made me realize that without repetition, you can't get incredibly good at jujitsu. And so I just don't think you can without repetition. That doesn't mean that the only way to get repetition is through deadpan drilling like that.
Mhm.
But that is the main idea of the athletic lens. And I explain this like, if you have a good coach, you have someone telling you what to drill and what to hit it as an athlete, you
Mhm.
really don't even have to. And I'm not saying this about Chewy or Andrew. These guys both know jujitsu very well, but you don't actually have to know jujitsu very well to get good in that lens. You can just get enough reps and then get in those positions and hit those positions. And your conditioning is good, because deadpan drilling is pretty hard on your conditioning. The next lens would have been John Thomas's lens, and that's the scientific lens. Problem solving. These guys do best. They learn best when they have small details. Small details are how they win rounds, right? And that's what they care about. And it's what interests them. And so, like, these guys can break down these lapel guard positions and these intricate positions, and that's what they love. They love the 12-step moves of jiu-jitsu, right? They love putting you into the system that you're
Mhm.
going, man, I can't do anything against this. This guy just is smarter than me, and that's why he's beating me, right? And
Mhm.
that's kind of the scientific lens. They like to problem solve. They do really, really well, though, by problem solving and then positional sparring, meaning, okay, we're looking at knee cuts. Let's do some rounds starting in De La Riva guard, see if I can hit any knee cuts. If I can't, we go back to the scientific lens of what went wrong. How could we get this to work? What do these guys do that we like to watch in competition? What does Josh McKinney's instructional, the knee cut roadmap say? Right. And so then the third lens, and this is where I've always seen jujitsu from, is the artistic lens. These are the guys that like to do things by feel. Okay, just tell me the idea and then let me try it. And then I'll come back to you if I struggle. But until I try it the first time,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't matter what else you tell me. I'm not going to grasp it. I need to go do it. That's how I've always learned jujitsu. And that's what's always helped me is that I've been able to like get a lot of, get a lot of feel, get a lot of, oh, just let me feel this, let me do it. But then being surrounded at an early age by guys like John Thomas, it let me see through the scientific lens of maybe we should break this down. Right? Maybe we should problem solve this too. So not only am I a guy that naturally can learn by feel now, I'm a guy that can problem solve too. And then I started to realize the significance of conditioning. I don't do it much anymore. Now I do designated winner. But for a long time, we used to like to do deadpan drilling for conditioning or really long drills for conditioning. And so, like I said, I don't do those anymore. But to me, it was me just dissecting, oh, these are all the different ways that I've learned jujitsu. And certain people will come into, and this is just, I guess, is a really long answer, but this is why it's significant, is certain people will come into jujitsu and their coach only learns through the way I learn. Their
Mm-hmm.
coach only learns through feel. And so they give you really broad ideas and then they say, go feel it, go experiment. But some people, whether it's like a confidence thing or whether it's just how they learn, they do not feel comfortable learning that way. They don't feel comfortable without a very big picture of how they're going to learn. And so they may not fit that lens as well. And so that's why I think that knowing that those three ways that people will naturally learn is out there. And sometimes the reason that some of the guys in your gym are getting good and some of them aren't is because you were only able to explain jujitsu in the perspective that you know it. And
Mm-hmm.
the guys that learn in that perspective naturally, they progress, and the guys
Yeah.
that don't, they struggle.
Yeah. So with that information in mind, if a coach knows he has a diverse group of people, which if you have more than a few guys, you're going to have different type of learners, right?
Mhm.
Um, it's their responsibility then as the coach, right, to diversify their training to kind of hit all the wickets so that way they can hit the majority of their students, right? Is that what you're saying? Like, do you think that's part
I,
of their responsibility?
I think making sure that those students are taken care of. So
Yeah.
maybe not. Maybe the coach goes, hey, we have a purple belt that learns a lot like you guys,
Mm,
and he has some really small details for you. And so, like, for instance, the way that I teach very broadly, it seems to be harder for brand new guys. And my coach, he's just on my podcast, Rob. I call him Bionic Rob. He just got a double hip replacement and was on the mat in like 6 weeks. And so he teaches our beginners now. And Rob is a small, fine details guy. I get the fine details that I know from Rob. And so if you highlight people's strengths, I don't even have to fix the fact that I hate details. I don't have to. That's a weakness of mine. That's a
yeah.
weakness of mine in every area of my life. It's kind of the same in jiu-jitsu. And yeah, I could work on it more, but I don't know how much I could actually strengthen that. But I do know that I have a guy whose main strength is that. I'll just ask him.
Yeah.
I'll just let him solve that stuff for me. And I let the other guys, the other students do the same. And so that's kind of the cool thing about having that idea of training as a group versus just like, hey, it's just my thoughts.
Mhm.
Like, don't get me wrong. My thoughts are more valuable than anybody else's at the gym. Like if you're paying the electric bill, that's how it works.
Mhm.
But there is a lot of times, like for instance, I was teaching class on Monday. I had an idea of what I was going to teach, and one of my black belts came in, and it was kind of like some of the stuff that we were doing was going to spill into front headlock and was going to spill into if it was a wrestling like referee's position.
Okay.
And this black belt that comes in had wrestled his whole life and is a good teacher and had a seminar or has a seminar this Saturday. And so I was like, oh, you know what? We'll get him some reps of let him get a little warm teaching. And so I said, hey, are you good with teaching? I'm going to share the first thoughts and then you're going to take over and show the moves tonight. And he said, yep, sounds good. And so I learned some different stuff. He showed a grip that I've never seen before. But he's done it to me a bunch of times. I've just never realized. And I picked up fine details from that. And he just taught in the way that he teaches. And so, of course, it doesn't affect everybody perfectly. But if I give a lot of variety, I just like, it's me kind of more doing my job. My job is to kind of facilitate learning, whether that means it's me teaching it or whether that means it's somebody else teaching it, just to make sure that everybody's getting better.
That's awesome. So for those who don't know which lens they learn through yet, maybe they're not really familiar with this yet. Obviously, the first thing they should do is go read the 3 lenses, right? So they can understand what that is.
But maybe they don't have the money for it, right? Maybe they're broke and they're like, I don't have any money. But guess what? The 3 lenses is absolutely free at simplifyingjujitsu.com/3. That is simplifyingjujitsu.com/3. Sorry, go ahead.
I was about to say, I was like, I'm pretty sure I got it for free. So if there is someone to pay, then I owe you some money after this. But so they got to figure that out first. But what if they don't have a diverse group of coaches? Like, what if they're a small school? They only have one coach. How should they train or how do they improve if their coaching style isn't in line with the student?
That's a really good question. I think you should and I think that even if you do have a phenomenal gym, I think you should always be doing this, but it's even more important if you really feel like I am the best guy in the room. That's a really tough place to be. It's a place everybody wants to be, but once you're there, it's hard to get better. And one of the easiest ways to get better is to constantly get inspiration. And one of the best ways to do that is to constantly get different perspectives. And I don't care if my perspective's better. I don't care if I'm never going to use what these guys are showing or what this guy on YouTube that I'm watching. Sometimes just hearing how someone else thinks of jiu-jitsu can help you explain it in a way that is so much simpler and let you affect more of your students with it.
That's awesome. Man, I can talk jiu-jitsu with you all day because I mean, like I said, I've not only have I binge listened to all of your podcasts, but I know you've done a lot for our community, and so I really appreciate you, and I've learned a lot from you. So, but taking a little bit of shift in direction here.
Before we shift from jiu-jitsu, can I ask you something?
Yes, sir.
Any personal jiu-jitsu problem thing that we could try to solve right now? Anything in your training? Anything that you're noticing? Progression stopped anywhere? Competition that you've wanted to try to hit and you're struggling with it? Anything like that? Hate to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I was not ready for that question. No, I mean, I can't think of one off the top of my head. I'm getting through some injury stuff right now for the first time in a long time. So I'm having to deal with a rib thing, which I'm sure you've done it before. Man, I'd rather get any injury at this point in jiu-jitsu than a rib thing. Like, man, you could tape up an ankle, wrist, whatever. Ribs suck.
Dude, one sneeze and you're done. What happened to your rib?
I was rolling a few weeks ago with one of my coaches. Just took a hard stack pass and just felt an immediate tweak. I kept rolling through it. And then when we got done, I was like, oh, that's not normal. And immediately got done. And it was funny because at first for like a week, the lower cartilage, connecting the rib to the sternum was messed up in the front. But then like the next week after that, I was like, I think I started to feel a little better. But then I started having pain migrate towards the back, like the ribs in the back too. And I never went to the doctor. Probably should have, but I didn't. And so I took like 3 weeks where I just did some light drilling and then started rolling a couple weeks ago. So it's not completely good yet, but I'm dealing with it. Luckily, I'm about to take a vacation actually starting tomorrow for a few days and then come back and hopefully be much better after that, but we'll see.
Would you like a completely uneducated bro science black belt opinion on rib injuries in jiu-jitsu?
That's all I take. That's all
good. So let me preface by saying I have no understanding of anything medically. I'm just a dude that has been on the mats a lot. And I struggled that when I said I had an injury for 18 months, it was a rib injury. And it was terrible, dude. It was such a bad injury. It kept getting re-injured.
Yeah.
And so what I realized, and this was for me specifically, so it may not be like this for you, but what I realized is that there is a correlation to why your back starts hurting when you popped your rib in the front. And it is because of either tightness in your back, meaning like right where your rib inserts, like on your spine,
Hmm.
or more likely tightness in your lat that causes your rib to pull out. And the reasoning behind it is your ribs are supposed to move. Your floating ribs are
Hmm.
floating. When you inhale and exhale, especially when you inhale and exhale and you're reaching and you're moving around like we do in jiu-jitsu, your
Hmm.
ribs are moving freely. I'm sure that stack position is a position you've been in a bunch of times, but
Yep.
for whatever reason, this time it popped. A lot of times you'll notice that, like, if you tried to roll out your lat between those ribs, that your rib that popped will be like, there will be knots that you're going, do I have cancer? Do I have tumors in my ribs? Do I have tumors in my lat? This is crazy. And when you start to release those, and you can release those kind of things with breathing exercises, you can release them with rolling out. But I have been rib injury free for like 18 months now. And I went 18 months without being rib injury free. And that was, I had researched everything. It was just, I didn't realize how tight my lats were. You can also do hangs. A lot of people do hangs, like just hands hanging from a bar. Even if you just, you can use wraps on your hands if you have trouble. If you have bad jujitsu hands like me and you just can't hold on to anything for any amount of time besides a gi, you can hang and let your ribs stretch out there too.
Hmm.
But those things super helpful.
Yeah, I gotta give that a shot. When I'm done too, I'll put a caption, I'll put a disclaimer. Josh is not a doctor. Do not take
Not,
medical advice on this
not. This is
podcast.
for entertainment purposes only.
Cool, man. I appreciate it. But yeah, so as you know, again, taking a shifting gears a little bit here. The name of the podcast, my podcast, is the Men of Principle podcast, right? What is one principle or character trait that you would like to see in men in men's society today?
Oh, that's a really good question. One,
I have to wrap up every podcast with this question because I want to see what everyone feels. Because
I
usually it's a little good combination of things, but
I think, man, I really would like to see more selflessness in people.
mm,
And what I mean by that, and that doesn't mean that you have to go and help the poor to be selfless.
mm,
But I think a lot of times that men especially flake on their duty as men to their wife, their significant other, because they're just too selfish.
mhm,
If you want to be selfish, you should probably be single. You probably, that's really what that is.
mhm,
If you are going to be in a relationship with somebody, or especially if you're going to have a child with somebody, to me, I think it's so important to know that, like, hey, I am choosing this.
yep,
And so I am choosing, I'm choosing to be here with you. I am choosing to be all in with you. I'm not going to hold it against you when you offend me. It's not going to be, that's just selfishness of like, oh no, I can't forgive you, or just things like that. I just see that a lot. I talk to my students that'll have trouble with their significant other, and then they'll tell me, and I'll be like, yeah, dude, you should go home and apologize. They're like,
mm,
well, I'm not wrong. Who cares? That's not what I said. You're not being selfless here. You are valuing your opinion more than your relationship, more than the peace in your house. That's
mhm,
insane. And so to me, I think that if, and I, of course, I still am not great at this, but I think if
yeah,
you're just more selfless, especially in your household, it just changes your life. But then even outside of your household, a lot of like the best opportunities that I've ever gotten have come from me helping somebody out with no real thought about it. It's just like, oh, this is my friend and I want to help them. And then all of a sudden, years later, something comes of that. And I go, whoa, if I wasn't helpful to that guy, that probably would have never happened. And so, yeah, I think selflessness would be big principle for me.
yeah. I completely agree with you. Two things on that. One, I had a buddy of mine on this podcast a couple months back. His name is Nick Krantz. Nick he's had multiple TBIs, concussions. Used to play football. He's married, got a few kids, and he said a great quote. He said, "If you could be selfish at unselfish times, you could be selfless the rest of the day." So what he meant by that, and what we talked about on the podcast, was he's selfish in the morning before his wife and kids get up. So he can work out, he can do his rehab, he can do whatever. And then once the wife and kids are up, then you can spend time with them. Then you can do whatever you have to do, right? The second thing was, I actually just made a podcast a couple weeks ago, and I titled it "The Irony of Selflessness." And I talked a little bit about how people who are selfish in nature, like you talked about, it's funny because majority of the time, like eventually they're just gonna be lonely. They're gonna be depressed. They're gonna be sad because they just continue to pursue selfish endeavors that eventually don't really mean a whole lot in the grand scheme of things. But those of us who are selfless to others, and especially in our relationship with our spouses, right? We gain so much more from that in the long run. And it's not even that that's your purpose or your intent behind being selfless, but in the end, you still reap so much more from doing that than the other way around. It's pretty interesting.
I think that when I just look at most people's problems, it usually has to do with this of some sort, right? It's like even their selfishness is in a form of how focused they are on themselves. Even if they're negative and their self-talk is negative, it's still self-obsession that they have, right? And
Mhm.
that is not being selfless. That is not thinking of yourself, right? And so when I, like same, I liked that quote of that of
Yeah.
being what was the unself? Say it again.
If you could be selfish at unselfish times, you can be selfless the rest of the day.
I think that's something that I do. I wake up earlier than my wife does because I like to have that little bit of alone time to do what I want.
Mm,
Usually what I want is stretch a little, drink my coffee, read my Bible. That's it.
yeah.
But sometimes it's not. Sometimes I want to wake up and I'm like, I want to get to the gym. I have something that I want to record at the studio right now. I'm like, I
Mhm.
have a couple hours before she'll wake up. I could sneak away. And so, yeah, I do definitely think that too. But when you are, when you come back home,
Mhm.
not being engaged and being like, oh, well, I wish I could have dedicated more time to my podcast. Podcast would be so much better if I wasn't married. Maybe, but I chose to be married.
Mhm.
I want to be married, and that is, putting this person above myself, their desires, their wants above my own. That's really important. That's going
Yeah.
to help me keep my marriage.
So speaking of your marriage, then we talked about competition, and obviously you're recently married, right? Over how long ago was it?
5 years,
5
a
years.
little over 5.5.
How has it changed since you got married? Like competing, like is it a lot more difficult now that you're married? Being able to compete, do you have to be a lot more specific and prioritize your time a lot better with your marriage in order to compete? How has that changed?
So I don't think that, I mean, I had less time to dedicate to training. Um, but I never really noticed a huge effect in like competition. And I think a lot of that had to do with like uh when we got married, my wife and I had been together, I think for 7 years. And
Mhm.
so we had, grown up where I was a jujitsu competitor. And so that was something that we always did. But I will say this, um, in the last couple years, as I've really shared what my vision is to my wife of like, hey, this is what I think I can do competitively. And even if not, I want to try to do it.
Yeah.
As I've shared that with my wife, I've noticed that, I have certain instances that she's helped me so much at competitions and helped calm me down after a match where I got injured and I have another match coming up and like help me in so many different ways. And obviously, like now, so she didn't start training jujitsu until we were married.
Mhm.
And now that she started training and then she competed a few times, it gave her this whole new perspective of what somebody actually needs at a tournament.
Mhm.
And at the tournament, we are both kind of focused on me. It's really, when we're there, it's not about her. It's just about, hey, this is your moment. This is how we're going to focus on it. She is there engaged. I mean, really, it's about us. She's engaged. We all have my team. We all have the same goal. It's for Josh to win this next match.
Mhm.
And we're all contributing any way we can. And so I notice as long as I do a good enough job flipping the switch back off, that it never has, that she's always okay with me traveling, that she's always okay with me doing all these other things. It's just when I compete, like this season, I competed, it's like, what is it? June. I competed 8 times this year. And I didn't compete and start competing until the end of February. So 8 times since the end of February. And yeah, just a ton of competition, just a ton of matches. And so there were times that I would compete and then the next week I would have another tournament. And as long as I could go from compete, get home, and just be Josh again, and just be coach again, and just be those things, and then
Mhm.
be able to flip the switch back on Friday when it's time to get back in the routine of competition.
Mhm.
Um, there, like, in this year, I've done a better job at that than I think I've ever done before. It was almost like, wow, this has become way easier for both of us now. But when I didn't do that, maybe last year, especially my first times making middleweight, the diet was so hard. It's hard to keep it out of your mind, right? It's
Yeah.
all I'm thinking about is how I can't eat. Uh, that was harder. That was like her going, okay, Josh, you need to chill out. We're not at the tournament anymore. It's time to calm down about it. It's time to stop obsessing about it and move
Mhm.
on. And so, yeah, it's just, man, for me now, my wife has become such a helpful part anymore. When I'm competing, like
Mhm.
she wasn't able to make the trip to Worlds, just being pregnant, being on a 4 or 5 hour flight, and then being there for a week. It wasn't going to fly. And so I'm like, man, I miss her on competition day. I noticed
Yeah.
that I'm a little more calm, and it's just somebody knowing what I need,
Yeah.
because you don't always need the same thing every tournament. For example, I like in February, my first tournament back, it was just as a match. I hadn't competed in about 4 months, and I'm very amped up for it. And it's the main event, and it's at nighttime. And I wake up, and she reads pretty much at like by 10 a.m. She goes, "Hey, you need to calm down." And I'm like, "What? Why?" She goes, "Well, you don't compete for 12 more hours." And she goes, "It's gonna be there when it's time." And
Mhm.
it's all she said. And this is a conversation we've had 100 times. And her competing and me competing, me saying this stuff to her, "Babe, it's gonna be there. Don't worry about it. It's gonna be there. You're gonna warm up and the jujitsu will be there. Just do
Mhm.
jujitsu, but relax until then." And so she told me that at this match. And it was so funny that she was my mental coach that I listened to on this, because I probably at this event had 40, 50 different people literally come up to me and be like, "Hey, you seem a little calm. You seem a little too chilled out. You don't seem like," because I really am. I'm just hanging out. I'm just not worried about it. About 30
Mhm.
minutes before, when it was time to warm up, it was time to go. I was there, and I had all my energy saved for that moment. And I looked back as like when we got in the car after I won that match, we got in the car, and I told my wife, I was like, "Wow, that was really cool." I go, "Babe, thanks for getting on me. Thanks for telling me there." And it's like not the like I said, it's not the first time she's done it. But yeah, it's been really nice the more that I've just had more of a chance at black belt, that
Mhm.
we can really get the team around and really get everybody riled up.
Yeah, and that's cool that she was telling you the same thing that you've told her before, so it's almost like you're just listening to yourself.
Exactly. Yes. And it's like, "Oh, you're right. It is what I say. You're totally right."
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Well, cool. Hey, Josh, I know we've been talking for like an hour, man. So I know you're a busy man, so I don't want to take up too much of your time. But again, I really do appreciate you being on the show. I appreciate you taking the time out to speak with me. And but for those who are listening on the podcast who maybe aren't familiar with you, how can they find you? Like, where do they go to look you up on social media?
So at the Josh McKinney on Instagram is that Instagram's pretty much the only thing that I post anything on social media wise, and I'm terrible at responding to messages on there and stuff like that. So if you ever wanted to actually get in contact with me, sending me an email, josh@simplifyingjujitsu.com is probably the best way to do that. But also, if you ever just want to hear my thoughts on things, on especially in the jiu-jitsu space, I post 2 episodes a week on the I Suck at Jiu-Jitsu show. One is a solo episode where it's just me breaking down an idea or something. Those come out on Thursdays. And the other is generally an interview, and those come out on Tuesdays. And that's pretty much all my stuff.
That's awesome, man. And I'll make sure to caption. I'll put all this stuff in the caption too, so everyone can find it. So, but yeah, man, I really appreciate you taking the time out. Thank you all for listening. Be sure to go follow Josh. Go find the I Suck at Jiu-Jitsu show if you do jiu-jitsu, or if not, and you just want to learn about jiu-jitsu. I mean, I don't know why you would want to listen to someone do jiu-jitsu if you don't want to try it yourself. But, go give it a shot. I still like it. But yeah, man, I really appreciate you. Thank you everyone for listening. Have a great day. Be a man of principle. Take care, guys.